So today we are looking to have a conversation around regenerative agriculture, around food systems, food security, climate resilience. And I'm going to be sharing my screen and I'm starting off this conversation with some details about my own experiences here in Guatemala, and then inviting May, who you heard from in our discussion just now in the main session, to also share about her experiences and her work, specifically maybe also around your PhD, May, and thinking about gender and urban studies. So we're really looking forward to hearing more about that, and also hearing from all of you. I think that let me just make sure everybody's here. I think it would be great to hear from all of you, not just in the chat, but also to hear who you are, where you've come from, what your interest is in this theme. And we will be having a conversation around some of the 3 questions that were posted in the chat earlier that have been on our Eventbrite. So do get thinking about your answers. And we also want to encourage you to get a paper and pen ready, because we're going to be having an interactive art creative activity at the end, which will also be an opportunity to hear from all of you about your ideas around food security and climate resilience. So before we get into that section, I'm going to get some ideas flowing and take the opportunity to share with you a bit about the themes of food security and climate resilience here in Guatemala. Give me 1 second. Okay. Can somebody confirm if you're seeing a screen with 4 photos living on the land? Great.
Yes.
Great, thank you. These are some images from the Maya Ixil region of Guatemala, where I am currently based. And also, I think some images which, no matter where they are, sum up some of the issues that we are currently facing in this time of climate crisis when it comes to where does our food come from, how do we produce our food, and what do we consume. So I mentioned some of the questions that we'll be addressing today. How can we strengthen food security in our local communities? And you can see here, this is one of the local communities in Chichicastenango in Guatemala. In what ways does sustainable agriculture relate to climate resilience? And what does a regenerative and holistic food system look like for the future? I encourage you to specifically think about the 3rd question there, as that's the one that we will be doing a creative activity on later, and asking you to visualize, what does a regenerative and holistic food system look like for you? How do you imagine a future in which we all have equal access to a food system and we all have the ability to feed ourselves? So we're going to be asking you to either draw or write a phrase or a word that sums up a response to that question. So get thinking around that theme. As I mentioned earlier, I'm part of the UN House Climate and Gender team, and I also, at the moment, I'm living in Nevaj in Guatemala. This is Nevaj in the Cuchumatanes Mountains, and I'm launching a nature education project with my partner called Casagua. Nevaj is a 95% an indigenous Maya Ixil community, which is one of 22 indigenous communities in Guatemala. And I think it's interesting to talk about this very specific case study, which is something that we can see and in fact relate to experiences of living on the land in Scotland and in different parts of the world. So wherever you are, who's joining us here today, then there are going to be parallels and similarities, even though Nevaj, as you can see, is a remote mountain valley community. However, when we think about living on the land, this means, our relationship with peasant agriculture, with consumption, with local food markets, with our relationship with the land often being thought of something as belonging to the past rather than belonging to a future of creating dignity in life on the land. And I think dignity is a really important word when we think about our relationship with the land and our relationship with food systems. here are some photos of the project that is currently in progress for some of the children that we're working with here in Nirmah. And I've also put some words at the side, which I think are also really important when I think about dignity on living on the land and what it means to engage young people in food systems and encourage them to think about climate resilience for futures which are going to be able to respond to all of the many challenges that are unfortunately growing as we see more natural disasters, increased global warming, and all of the problems that come from those mammoth problems that we're facing wherever we are in the world. So I also think it's interesting, and I'd love to hear from May more about this as well. You can either come in now or afterwards, May, about agroecology, about permaculture, and about just transition in our food systems. We often hear the phrase just transition, and I'm really interested in thinking about this in the context of ecology, that when the human presence on Earth is part of an integrated whole, and the local ecosystem is not just what us humans do on the land, but also how do we have an ecological approach? How do we ensure that plants, forests, rivers are protected and cared for, and that we are part of an integrated system? So, May, I'm sure you have things to say on that. Would you like to jump in at this point?
Yes, well, I want to take on that point that in my introduction, I say that healthy soil, healthy communities, because food systems depend on soil. And the focus of my work over the years, working in Bangladesh and in India, and also in the Sahel, was always to build soil, and building soil, building community, because food systems cannot, even if you really want to have a localized food system, if you don't have soil, you can't do it. And what happens is that with the globalization of the food systems, many of the big corporations like Monsanto, they kind of shape and shift their identity and came to the communities and start bringing all these incentives for the soil. And that the first year, maybe you have a largest harvesting. And then the second year, you have to buy more. And then you have all the debts and all that. So just constructing that at the same time that you build the soil. But the building the soil is about also strengthening the sense of belonging with the place, and also is about creating spaces for women decide how they're going to decide. So we start looking at much more of a social, ecological, economic, regenerative, really counteracting to global forces that are coming in with the strength of of spring floods, in a way, wanting to to come in and get new clients and all of that. So I would say that it is a solution has to be localized, and it has to be, I mean, my experience is building community, building soil, and also by doing that, I don't use the verb empowering, because empowering, from my background in Brazil, disciple of Paulo Freire, who has the power to give to somebody else. So it's like creating the conditions for the regeneration of the soil and the connection that some communities have lost, which is food and health. So and you need to be working with these communities for many years for women to start realizing that, wow, I don't need to go more to the doctors. In the beginning, you go to the communities and they have like a 200 grams of rice, a mountain of rice, and one vegetable. And over the years, they have many more vegetables and less rice. And you start measuring the arms of the kids that were very, very thin, and they start growing into nourishment. So yeah, I would say that it has to be a much wider and community approach, and food by itself becomes really, oh yeah, let's put food in. It is about soil, it is about community, it's about decision making, and and co-creating with the forces of nature that are there. And also adapting, Kat, because many times, for instance, we will come into a region, and we start getting some irrigation from local, and then suddenly you put too much water, and then salt comes up. So you have to start adapting and learning by doing. But I'll say that permaculture, biodynamic, all these ecological approaches combine to the wisdom of the land, and can really shift completely the way that they feed themselves.
Thank you so much, May. I think, you know, that gives so much food for thought. Food being the key word, and also, you know, thinking about nourishment, that, you know, there are so many different ways that we can nourish ourselves, but as you say, you know, it has to happen with an integrated approach in which, you know, the ways in which we live on the land, the ways in which we interact with and regenerate the soil also impacts, you know, our nourishment in terms of our physical environment, our emotional selves, our connection with community, our capacity to co-create. I'd love to hear from others as well, who are here with us today, you know, in response. If you also, you know, have experiences within a local community, within, you know, wherever you are, and your interest in this field. So if anybody would like to jump in, and just please unmute yourselves and feel free to contribute. Okay, well, I will continue, but do feel free to jump in whenever you have a thought to share, and May as well. I might also be asking you to contribute at specific moments.
Yeah, I just want to add,
you know, just thinking about.
I just want to add two pieces of, you know, surprise. I was just, I'm just back from Paris last week. I was at UNESCO. I work in association with UNESCO for many years, and the lawn of UNESCO that has those beautiful sculptures of Henry Moore and all of that, they have been completely transformed into edible landscape. So they have over 146 vegetables now growing in the big lawn of UNESCO. So it seems that, you know, this impulse of start, you know, growing food where you are. I have an allotment in Edinburgh. It took many years for me. There's 10 years in a queue, but where you are, you can grow your food. You know, you should not be waiting for a project to come in or funds from somewhere else, but it's like, it's really possible for you to, you know, cut food miles, eat seasonally, start growing your food, and see the impacts in your health.
Claudia, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, it does kind of follow on from that. It's really lovely to be part of this discussion. And I think I just wanted to highlight that one of the most precious experiences I've had in relation to the land, just personally, is apart from trying to grow my own food in a sustainable organic way, is to have been an eco schools coordinator in 2 primary schools, and actually working not only with the young children in the experience of growing food and sharing it and cooking it, but also intergenerational work, which I think is really important for us across the world, really. And a lovely example of it was a young girl who actually grew tomatoes with her papa, with her granddad, and then they brought them in and we all made a salad out of them, and he was delighted and she was delighted. So I think those kind of experiences, you know, the people of Abington and Bray Head, where I worked, are kind of as indigenous as the people who you're working with where you are, Kat. And I wondered what the screen behind you was, but now I know. But I think those experiences are quite important. Yeah.
Thank you, Claudia. And yeah, the mention of intergenerational, I think, is especially important when thinking, for example, here, ancestral wisdom. You know, we are often very focused on thinking about the future, and of course, you know, including voices from young people and ensuring that children are engaged in these issues. But so often the way to engage children in these issues is to ensure that they are talking with their ancestors and that they are, you know, implementing some of the things that worked over thousands of years, and to ensure that we don't lose them. I'd like to think specifically in the context of CSW about gender equality, about women on the land. Small-scale farmers produce 70% of the world's food, and over 50% of those small-scale farmers are women. So, you know, it's really important that we include women's voices as we're talking about in this conversation overall. And after describing a bit about what this painting means and who Paula Micho Kumes is, Mariam, I'm going to give you some advance warning. I'd really love if you would be able to share a bit about pastoralists in the context that you're looking at, and specifically the role of women. So if you're okay to do that, then that would be great. I'll first explain a bit about this painting. Paula Micho Kumes is a Maya Sutuhil painter, and in this painting, she represents some of the issues around food security, and specifically the impact on women in Guatemala. This is a quote in which she says, each woman has her story, each woman has her story engraved upon her body. The future is a weight, an uncertain landscape that we must lift up in order for us guys to move forwards. And this is a painting that I think speaks to us in all contexts, as I've mentioned before, about the ways in which we share. And, you know, to echo some of Claudia and May's comments around the ways in which we co-create in community, the ways in which we engage with our ancestors, with other generations, in which we share food. There is a tradition in Guatemala called the Cuchubal, which is effectively a sharing circle that traditionally each family in a community. And it seems like such an intuitive way to feed ourselves, that, you know, we are able to share amongst community. We are able, as May said, to grow food where we are, and to ensure that we are provided for. So, you know, I think there are lots of interesting things happening in both rural and urban communities in terms of community gardens, allotments, eco schools, in thinking about how do we provide not just for ourselves and for our families, but for all of the communities where we live and work. So in thinking about that, and in thinking specifically about the weight of responsibility on women in terms of providing for our families, and working the land. Mariam, would you be happy to share a wee bit about your research with pastoralists in Nigeria, and specifically the impact on women?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. This is a great conversation. I'm learning a lot from this, honestly. My research is focused around climate justice, gender, and conflict in Nigeria, more especially the northern part of Nigeria. And it's surprising to find out that 80%, 70 to 80% of the women are responsible for agriculture. They're involved in farming. And just knowing this, I've never known this before. They go to farm, they do all that, but yet they do not have any access to agricultural loans. Yeah. So that is something they are struggling with. And in the northern part of the region where the pastoralists are, they have such access. The men have access to the loans. They collect the loans, and instead of them to invest it in the agriculture, they use it to marry other wives, because they're allowed to marry 1 to 4 women. So at the end of the day, the women are left with the responsibility of child caring, food, and all the stuff. and yet not having a means of sustenance, or will I say, not a sustainable means of sustenance. There's a lot ongoing. I'm going for my data collection this summer, so we'll be able to unveil what is really happening, because this is something that is happening, but it's happening behind closed doors. Nobody is aware of it. I am from the North, but I'm just finding out that 70% of women are involved in agriculture and they don't have any access to agricultural loans. So these are some of the problems that they're battling with, and there are a lot of things that are just hidden. It's only the research that will bring them to the forefront, honestly. And women do not have a voice from where I come from. Like, a woman is just supposed to be at home. She's supposed to be at home at the mercy of the husband. She doesn't have a voice. She doesn't have a right to speak. So I think that could be partially part of the problem. That should be the reason why they do not have any access to loans or any other support, because the woman is not seen as, there's a position that the women occupy actually. Even if you come to the house and you have brothers, they wouldn't want to speak with you. If a visitor comes, they will ask, where is the man of the house? They don't like to speak with women. There's a position that they've placed women, which is impacting on them generally. And the women take a lot of responsibility in terms of food production, childcare, and family. And I think they are not being supported adequately. Thank you.
Marianne, here's May.
Thank you so much, Mayam, for sharing this.
I'm not sure if you can hear me. Marianne, I have a question to you. Why would they need loans? Is this for buying seeds? And is there a possibility, because one of the things that we've been working in some communities is that there is initial support for perhaps the first year with seeds, but the whole thing is about saving seeds for the next year so they don't become dependent on loans and things like that. Why would they need loan in the region where you're working or studying, where women need money for? Is it for buying seeds?
Right now, I really can't tell, because that's what I'll be finding out in my data collection. Can you hear me,
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear.
Yeah.
No, because
I said, like my research is at the preamble, but these are some of the things that are coming up from the literature review. So these are the things I'm gonna dig out and find out later on in the data collection.
Okay, no.
And maybe, and part of needing the money, maybe because they have unsustainable practices, because I'm sure if they have sustainable practices, maybe their reliance on agricultural loans and all that may not be that much. But if at all they have access to it, what I intend to say is, if at all there's the provision and there's access to it, then it should be for all. It shouldn't just be like, the women should not be sidelined. If at all the men can have access to the loans, then why not the women?
Yeah, well, I became really preoccupied when you said that, because we actually see this, the need for loans is to buy non-perennial seeds that they'll be hooked, because they're coming with multinationals, and then the next year they need more money to put more fertilizers on the land and things like that. That's why I was thinking in the projects we're working, there's no loans. It's about building the capacity of women to save the seeds for the next year, and then saving even more seeds so they're completely out of the need of borrowing money to pay multinationals to grow their food. So I was just aware. I just wanted to know if you knew why they need loans.
No, this is really a brilliant idea, and this is something I'm gonna put into consideration in my data collection, because now that you're talking, it's making me think that there could be some unsustainable practices going on, and that could be the reason why they are relying on loans and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a couple of papers that I wrote regarding this journey to freedom from loans and external seed fertilizers companies and all that. I can send your way.
Thank you, May. That would be helpful.
Okay.
Claudia.
Yeah, thanks. I had put a question which relates to this actually earlier in the chat, which is long ago I found that some big companies such as Monsanto were actually selling indigenous communities sterile seeds. So they had to go back every year, which is really shocking. And it was preventing, and there was so much marketing and advertising about it that some people thought, who were buying the seed, thought they were better seeds, whereas their own seed is more resilient for their own communities and for their own growth. And that sterile seed and also GM seed was affecting the indigenous seeds. So I just highlight that because that might be another reason why in those circumstances loans shouldn't be necessary. However, as you were saying, sorry, I didn't catch your name, who's doing the study that you were talking about.
Mariam.
Yeah, still, if it shouldn't be that only the men are getting the loans, if there are any loans. So
Yeah.
but I don't know if it's still so,
Glad
you know, which seems so disgusting to do that, you know. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I'd heard.
I think the mention of Monsanto is very important because that is, you know, as you've all been saying, you know, that is exactly the agenda, you know, to create a cycle of dependency. And in Central America, you know, Monsanto's impact has been devastating and is devastating. So, you know, really thinking about agroecology and organic practices and, you know, shortening supply chains and creating localized food systems is so important so that there isn't that reliance and dependency on seeds that are being, you know, genetically modified so that they, you know, don't last, so that there is not, you know, food sovereignty within a community. And, you know, we're talking here about food security, but I think it's interesting to also mention food sovereignty, which is, you know, seeds that are saved from, you know, organic crops that are native to those communities. And so that creates, you know, this possibility for a localized food system in which, you know, the seeds belong to that community and have the strength and dependency and resilience for that particular climate and for that particular group. So yeah, it's really interesting to think about all of these themes and the contexts that are perhaps quite similar between Scotland, Nigeria, Guatemala, and you know what we can learn from those different contexts as well. Does anybody else who hasn't said anything, you know, have any kind of ideas or pointers on any of these themes or other themes?
Well, I'd just like to say, Kat, it's quite a new area for me. So I'm finding it very, very interesting. And I'm coming across lots of things like I would have heard of Monsanto in the past, but wasn't quite aware of how it was working out now. And being from Ireland, we have moved from very much an agricultural economy to more industrial and computer systems and things like that. So as a teacher myself from County Donegal, we did have an organic garden, and the children grew vegetables from the time they came to school, and we had a cooker in an oven, so we did cook the vegetable food. But that was a very small way in comparison. But yet a lot of those children, even though they lived in the countryside, didn't know potatoes grew under the ground and carrots grew under the ground. And I remember actually when I started my career in Dublin, having a little child in my class who thought milk came from a bottle and the bottle came from the cafe. But I mean, what you're talking about is in Asia and the global south is something which I know we have to become more sustainable here, but it's important that we support the global south to become sustainable and their communities. And that what you've been talking about, the seeds and that doesn't happen, that it is regenerated and sustainable. Yes, so I really am trying to learn and read up about this and become more familiar. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Jackie. And I hope that you've spoken in the past tense that the school you work in had a vegetable garden, and hopefully that's something that can be implemented again, because it is such a key way, as Claudia was also saying with eco schools, a key way to really ensure that the future is resilient against climate shocks. One of those is to ensure that children have the knowledge and don't just think about cafes and supermarkets, but are thinking about what happens in the ground and in the soil.
Yeah, well, just to the reason I'm not growing vegetables at the moment is that we live in a city in the north of Ireland which has the highest density of pollution in the UK. And we thought it was safer actually to get our organic vegetables from, it's just 3 miles down the road from an organic sustainable community. It's a drugs rehabilitation centre and they have their own garden, and we support them. So
I think we have a few minutes left, and as I mentioned at the beginning, I'd love for everybody to get a pen and paper ready and to think about the answer for you to one of the questions at the beginning. Before that, I just want to very quickly mention a group which is in a different part of Guatemala, called Nalibac. They work to empower women. They are a network of Maya Kekchi women, and they're working with the communities in a region in the center of Guatemala, which was highly impacted by the Hurricane Zeta and Iota. You can see on the left here that a huge part of cropland flooded a year and a half ago, and that water hasn't gone away. So part of climate resilience is also ensuring that small-scale agriculture feeds the community and is able to respond to situations like flooding, drought, which are worsening in the community. So this is, an example of women on the land, women having access to land, women being recognized for their role in agriculture, which is something that's, being brought up a number of times today in different contexts. So I wanted to share that quickly and then return to the questions that we are going to think about in these last few minutes. It would be great if you could get a pen and paper and feel comfortable to share if you want to turn your videos on afterwards, or just have it as a reflection exercise for yourselves. Whether that's in County Donegal, in Guatemala, in northern Nigeria, in Brazil, in Scotland, or globally. So, feel free to do a drawing, to write a phrase, to write a word, or any of the kind of ideas that you've got buzzing around in your head from this conversation. Is that clear? Do you know what you have to do or want to do? If you don't want to do it, that's also fine, of course. But it would be great if in 2 minutes we could hold up a piece of paper, if you feel comfortable putting your videos on, and share with the rest of the group about what does a regenerative and holistic food system look like.
Kat, I'm just aware that we have 30 seconds left until this breakout room closes. So I don't know if you...
Oh no. Okay, in the last 30 seconds, if you have something ready, would you like to show it to the camera? And if anybody wants to throw out a word, I see, let's feed ourselves together locally, sustainably. I see collaboration at grassroots level. I see lots of people